The small figure stood trembling in the doorway of the community center, her worn-out shoes barely holding together, her thin jacket doing little against the November cold. 7-year-old Maya had learned long ago that the world wasn't always kind to children like her. Children whose clothes came from donation bins, whose meals depended on the generosity of strangers, whose nights were spent in the cramped backseat of an old station wagon that her mother called home. She had learned to make herself small, invisible, to expect nothing and hope for less. But today, watching the other children throw themselves into their father's arms after the Thanksgiving charity event, something inside her cracked open. She couldn't stop the words that tumbled out when the tall man with kind eyes walked past her, his own daughter wrapped around his leg. "Can you give me a hug, please?" The question hung in the air like a prayer, and what happened next would change both their lives forever. David Morrison had been a single father for 3 years. Ever since his wife Sarah passed away from cancer, leaving him to raise their 6-year-old daughter Emma alone, he had built his life around routines and responsibilities, dropping Emma at school, working his shifts as a physical therapist, picking her up, making dinner, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories. It was a good life, a full life, but somewhere in the constant motion, he'd forgotten how to see beyond his own small circle of survival. That Saturday, he'd brought Emma to the community center's Thanksgiving preparation event, where volunteers were assembling meal boxes for families in need. Emma had been excited to help, carefully placing canned goods into boxes, her small face serious with concentration. David had been proud of her compassion, her willingness to think of others, but he'd been focused on the tasks, on keeping Emma occupied, on getting through another weekend in the endless succession of weekends that made up their life. He almost didn't hear the small voice, almost walked right past. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the tremor in those words, the courage it must have taken for this child to ask. Maybe it was the way his daughter Emma froze, her eyes wide as she looked up at the girl, who was only a little older than herself but seemed to carry the weight of the world in her thin shoulders. David turned and really looked at Maya for the first time. Her dark hair was tangled, her face smudged with dirt, her eyes too old for her years, but it was her expression that undid him, a mixture of desperate hope and expectation of rejection, as if she'd already prepared herself for him to say no, to walk away, to confirm what the world had already taught her about her place in it. For a moment, David felt the old instinct to protect his own space, his own daughter, to maintain the boundaries that made life manageable. He thought of all the reasons to politely decline. He didn't know this child. It wasn't appropriate. He was busy. He needed to get Emma home. But then he saw Sarah in his mind's eye, the way she would have responded. Sarah, who had never met a stranger, who had believed that love was not a finite resource that diminished when shared, but infinite. Well, that deepened with every drop given away. Sarah, who would have been ashamed of him for even hesitating. David dropped to one knee, bringing himself to Maya's eye level. He opened his arms wide. "Come here, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with unexpected emotion. Maya didn't move at first. She stared at him as if he were speaking a foreign language, as if kindness was something she'd heard about but never actually encountered. A single tear rolled down her cheek, then another. Then she stumbled forward and David caught her in his arms. She was so small, so fragile, her body shaking with sobs that seemed too big for her thin frame. David held her tightly, one hand cradling her head, the other wrapped around her back, and felt his own eyes burn with tears. He could feel her ribs through her jacket, feel the desperation in the way she clung to him, as if he were a life raft in a stormy sea. How long had it been since someone had held this child? How long since someone had told her that she mattered? "It's okay," he whispered. "You're okay. I've got you." Emma, who had been watching with wide eyes, suddenly stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around both of them, creating a circle of warmth. "You can share my daddy," she announced with the simple generosity of children who haven't yet learned to hoard their blessings. They stayed like that for a long moment, this unlikely trio, while the other volunteers paused in their work, while the world seemed to hold its breath. When Maya finally pulled back, her face was streaked with tears but transformed. Something had shifted in her expression, not fixed, not solved, but seen, acknowledged, valued. "What's your name, honey?" David asked gently, keeping one hand on her shoulder. "Maya," she whispered. "I'm David, and this is Emma. Are you here with someone?" Maya nodded toward a woman in the corner who was filling out paperwork with a volunteer. The woman looked exhausted, defeated, her clothes as worn as Maya's. David recognized the look, the shame of needing help, the weight of failing to provide for your child, the desperate hope that somehow things would get better mixed with the certainty that they wouldn't. David made a decision then, the kind of decision that divides a life into before and after. "Emma," he said, "why don't you take Maya over to the children's area and show her the books while I talk to her mom for a minute?" Emma grabbed Maya's hand with enthusiasm. "Do you like stories? My favorite is about a bear who loses his hat." As the girls walked away together, David approached Maya's mother. She looked up warily as he introduced himself, her body language defensive, prepared for judgment. "I'm David Morrison," he said, extending his hand. "Your daughter Maya just taught me something important about courage." The woman, who introduced herself as Linda Chen, looked confused. "What do you mean?" David told her about Maya's request, about the hug, about the moment that had cracked his heart open. "I just wanted you to know that you're raising a remarkable kid, and I wanted to ask, is there anything we can do to help?" Linda's eyes filled with tears. "We're managing," she said, the lie automatic, protective. "I used to say that too," David said gently. "After my wife died, when people asked how we were doing, we're managing. But managing isn't the same as thriving. It's not the same as being okay." He paused. "Where are you staying?" The story came out slowly, painfully. Linda had lost her job as a medical billing clerk 6 months ago when the office downsized. She'd lost her apartment 2 months later, unable to make rent. Her family was on the other side of the country and in no position to help. She'd been applying for jobs constantly, but it was hard when you had no permanent address, no consistent access to showers or clean clothes for interviews, no childcare. She was on the waiting list for transitional housing, but the list was long. Meanwhile, she and Maya were living in their car, spending days in the library and parking lots, nights in 24-hour store parking lots or rest stops, always moving to avoid police. She made sure Maya got to school every day, made sure she had food even when Linda went hungry, made sure she did her homework, tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy in circumstances that were anything but normal. "I'm so ashamed," Linda whispered. "Maya deserves so much better. She never complains, never asks for anything. I didn't even know she was so touch-starved that she'd ask a stranger for a hug." "She's not asking strangers," David said. "She's asking humans to be human. And you should be proud of her for still believing that's possible." Over the next hour, while Emma and Maya played together, David made phone calls. He called his friend Marcus, who ran a property management company and had mentioned having a vacant garage apartment. He called his colleague Jennifer, whose physical therapy clinic was looking for front desk help. He called his mother, who loved volunteering and had often mentioned wanting to be more involved in Emma's life. He called Pastor Williams at the church he rarely attended anymore, asking about their emergency assistance fund. By the time the community center event was winding down, David had assembled the beginnings of a support network. Marcus agreed to rent the apartment to Linda at a drastically reduced rate for the first 6 months. Jennifer agreed to interview Linda on Monday for the clinic position. David's mother, delighted to be asked, offered to provide childcare after school until Linda got on her feet. The church had funds available for first month's rent and deposit, plus some furniture from their donation warehouse. "I don't understand," Linda said, stunned. "Why would you do all this for us? You don't even know us." David glanced over at Emma and Maya, who were curled up together on a beanbag chair, looking at a picture book, Emma's arm around Maya's shoulders, as if they'd been friends forever instead of for an hour. "Because your daughter had the courage to ask for what she needed," he said, and I almost walked away. I almost let my own walls, my own grief, my own comfortable numbness make me miss this moment. Your daughter reminded me, what my wife always knew, that we're not meant to live in isolated bubbles of survival. We're meant to be connected, to help each other, to remember that any of us is only ever a few bad breaks away from needing help ourselves. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. My wife died believing in the goodness of people. For 3 years I've been going through the motions, protecting me and Emma, keeping us safe. But safe isn't enough. Sarah would have wanted us to live bigger than that, to love bigger than that, Maya reminded me. As they prepared to leave that evening, Maya ran up to David one more time. This time she didn't ask. She just wrapped her arms around his waist and squeezed tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," David said, hugging her back. "Thank you." 6 months later, Linda was thriving in her new position at the clinic. Having earned a promotion to office manager, she and Maya had moved from the garage apartment into a small 2-bedroom rental. Maya was flourishing in school, her grades improving, her confidence growing, and Emma had a best friend who understood what it meant to lose something precious and find unexpected grace. But perhaps the most significant change was in David himself. He had started volunteering regularly at the community center, using his professional skills to offer free physical therapy sessions to homeless individuals. He'd joined the church's outreach committee. He'd opened his heart to the possibility of connection again, not as a replacement for Sarah, but as a fulfillment of everything she'd believed in. On Thanksgiving Day, Linda and Maya joined David and Emma for dinner, along with David's mother and Marcus and Jennifer and their families. As they went around the table sharing what they were grateful for, Maya spoke clearly without embarrassment. "I'm grateful that I was brave enough to ask for a hug, and that Mr. David was kind enough to give me one." Emma grabbed Maya's hand. "I'm grateful that you asked my dad instead of someone else." When it was David's turn, he had to pause to collect himself. "I'm grateful," he finally said, "for a little girl who reminded me that the bravest thing we can do is ask for what we need, and the most human thing we can do is give it. Sarah always said that love multiplies when you share it." Maya and Linda taught me she was right. That night, after everyone had gone home, Emma asked the question that had been on her mind. "Daddy, what would have happened if Maya had asked someone who said no?" David pulled his daughter close. "I don't know, baby. Maybe someone did say no before me. Maybe lots of someones. But that's why it's so important that when someone asks us for kindness, we say yes. We might be the only yes they get." "I want to always say yes," Emma declared. "Me too," David agreed. "Me too. In a world that often feels too big, too broken, too indifferent to individual suffering." The story of Maya and David is a reminder that transformation begins with the smallest gestures: a child brave enough to ask, an adult humble enough to answer, a moment of connection that ripples outward, changing everyone it touches. Maya's question cost her nothing but courage. David's answer cost him nothing but openness. But together they created something priceless. Proof that humanity, compassion, and love are always just a hug away, waiting for someone brave enough to ask and someone kind enough to give.